On this episode of Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A, we talk with Bill Mitchell about how family and friends can spot abusive relationships. Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Bill Mitchell. How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to speak with you today and your audience. Thank you.
Well, Bill, thank you for being here. And for those that don't know who you are, you have a podcast that is very similar to this podcast, and it's called When Dating Hurts, and you can find it at whendatinghurts.com, and you can find it on Apple, Spotify, every podcast player. You've also written a book called When Dating Hurts, and your daughter was a victim of dating violence. So tell us, your story of how you got to, the podcast, to the book. And, you had speaking engagements, all across America as well.
It starts off in a very good place, and that is her graduation in 2005, May 14th, 2005. She graduated from St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. A glorious day. I mean, she never looked more radiant, more happy, more with it, more proud. She had a job lined up with General Mills. She was going to be starting in about a month or so. And the only thing she had great friends, by the way, very loyal to her friends. So everything was kind of working for her, Kristin. And the only thing in her life that was bothersome was this boyfriend of about 4 or 5 months. And I call him Nick. It's not his real name. I just don't use his real name anywhere if I can help it. She'd been dating him for a while, and we didn't know anything about him at that time. The only inkling we had about him was my wife and my daughter had a phone conversation, and my daughter said, "Well, it's not the perfect relationship." And my daughter said that, and my wife didn't follow up on that. And I don't think I would have either. These days, I would say something like, "Well, what is it about that makes it not so perfect?" Or what would be the perfect relationship, but something to kind of follow that conversation. But at the time, my wife just took it as this relationship's not going to last very long, and what's the point of talking about it? Let's talk about something else. But we got to the graduation, and everything was great, except when I met this guy and shook his hand, the only thing that ran through my mind at that moment was, wow, I'd never want to tangle with this guy. So here I am meeting him, and I'm thinking about what it would be like to get into a fight with this guy. I should have acted on that. I should have done one of those identity websites, gone back into his past, maybe just see if there's something in there. Had I done that, I would have found things, by the way, but I didn't. So that is something that'll pass along to people. If you have any worries about somebody, spend your $49.99 and go take a look. It's well worth it. Trust me on that one. So anyway, but she graduated that day. Everything was great. And 21 days later, I received a call from local police. Now, I live outside of Baltimore. She was living in the Philadelphia area. That's 125 miles apart. But local police called me and said they needed to meet with me. They needed to tell me something. And my wife and son were not home at that time. And they said they had come by the home, but there was no one there. My wife and son were at a friend's graduation party, and I was at a restaurant with my parents. Anyway, so I didn't want to meet them at home because I wasn't sure that these are really going to turn out to be detectives or police. So what I suggested was meeting at a grocery store not far from home. And that's when I received every parent's worst nightmare, when they said, okay, if you want to talk here by the doors of the store, let's do it. They wanted me to sit in their car, and I still didn't believe, even though I saw badges. I just thought, this is too surreal. I thought I was going to be arrested or something. And it was at that time I was given parents' worst nightmare, which is we regret to inform you your daughter Kristin was murdered today by her boyfriend. And then everything's different. I could kind of picture all those things in life I was looking forward to with her were just gone. I could picture the holiday get-togethers and birthdays. Everything was just tapping right through my head. In the meantime, I had to call my wife and son at the graduation party, meet him at home. Called my parents, who I'd seen just earlier that day, had them come to the house and broke the news in our family room. And of course, everybody had a good cry. The next day is all about talking with detectives in the Philadelphia area, trying to learn as best we could what happened. In the meantime, driving to funeral homes and cemeteries, picking out a plot, making arrangements, things like that. And then days later, since her body was considered evidence, they had to examine her. And so it took a while for them to sort of ship her here to our place and then finally do a funeral. And your path's on and at that point, your whole life's on a whole different path. And the first year was mostly about trying to get our arms around what this was. We were asked to give a talk at a memorial service when the school year started up again for those who were still at the university. So a lot of her friends were there. And it was the first opportunity. This is about 5 months after she was killed, but it was the first opportunity to really get up in front of a group of people and talk about our feelings and talk about what little at that time we knew about dating abuse and domestic violence. Barely knew anything, but the one thing that was really important was that the people who were there listening to us were really caught up in what we were talking about. And I say that because not only seeing the attention we were getting, but the people who spoke before us, there was a woman from the White House who spoke about domestic violence, and she was giving all kinds of statistics, and she was giving websites and all. And people were listening as best they could, but they're kind of shuffling and here's somebody coughing or moving a chair or something like that. When we spoke, I spoke, my wife spoke, my son spoke. My son was 17. Everybody was perfectly quiet. It was tomb-like, and it was in a chapel. So that really, that made it more like a tomb. I also ran a short video about Kristin so everybody could see her and have a better sense of who she was and what she was all about. But there was power in that, and the things people said afterwards made me think that maybe things like speeches would be in our future. So as time went on, the case was delayed. They wanted more time. They claimed they needed to look at some other evidence and DNA work and things like that, which, by the way, they never did. They just bought time from the judge. We had a huge concern about the judge because we had heard that he leaned towards the defense oftentimes, leaned towards defendants, would give them breaks. So that made us kind of unhappy about that. Then finally a new date was established. The new date of a trial would have been right about at the anniversary of her death. She was killed on June 3rd, 2005. This would have been June 4th, 2006. It would have started on a Monday. And at that point, the guy who did it actually stepped forward and wanted to plead guilty to third-degree murder, which means that he would get 15 to 30 years. That was a big surprise that he wanted to do that. So our family wanted to accept it. The prosecution team did not. They wanted to get him on first-degree murder and put him away for life. And we were concerned because what evidence we had heard up until that point, although very difficult to listen to, what happened to Kristin. She was stabbed to death. But we didn't really feel secure that they could get him on first degree. And we thought it would wind up as third degree, but of course there'd be a trial and all the trauma that comes from that, all the crime scene business and everything. Another thing that made it difficult is that in the last day of her life, she and I had emailed back and forth 3 or 4 times. And so therefore, the fact that I was going to be called as a witness to her state of mind, which was healthy, I was not going to be allowed to be in the courtroom for any of the case, except in case I was asked to come and testify, which probably would have taken 5 minutes. Then I'd have to leave again. I would be stationed in a hotel down the street until summoned, if I was summoned at all. So that was all of this went into if we could go ahead with the plea, take the 15 to 30 on this guy and kind of shut this off, bring some closure. So we wanted to do that. We talked the prosecution team into accepting that. They didn't want to do it, but they did it mostly, I think, for us. So it still went down as a win for them. And so once you get past all of that, that first year, there were a number of occasions where I was asked to give speeches in front of small groups, sometimes large groups. About 2 years into it, I was asked to come and speak at Ravens Stadium in Baltimore. And there were almost 1,000 people who were in the audience. I also had a video for that ran about 5 minutes. I spoke for about 8 minutes. Up until the time that I spoke again, it was a luncheon. It was an annual fundraiser. And they, people are eating, there's food. And you can hear the clinking of the silverware and the glasses and all of that. And my wife leaned over while there were other speakers up there talking about various things about domestic violence or the domestic violence agency that was putting this on. My wife leaned over and said, "I can't believe how rude these people are here making all this noise." And I leaned over and I said, "I bet they become quiet when I get up and speak." So I did. I got up and I spoke, and all of a sudden it was so quiet. I wasn't sure if something else happened or somebody fainted or the microphone didn't work. I mean, I didn't know what was going on. It was just, but they were really into it. And so that again gave me the feeling that doing speeches and putting the story out, being that close to a person who had this happen to her had value, and that I needed to learn not only how to give the speeches and how to construct them and make them powerful, but also how to answer the questions at the end, which was a real concern of mine. Because it's one thing to get up and give a talk that's all prepared. It's another thing when someone asks you questions about domestic violence and protection orders and all these things, and you're thinking, I don't know anything about that. I would have to have someone from a domestic violence agency with me to help me.
So from here, you wrote a book called When Dating Hurts, and it's about your story and then everything that you learned about domestic violence, coercive control, and finishing a book is a big deal, a big thing. And you told me that when it was over, it was like you lost someone that you were talking to. So you eventually started a podcast, which we will get to. But first, can you go through things that people should be looking for, warning signs of an abusive relationship that may or not be recognizable to outsiders? And then I'll chime in after with tips for friends and families, do's and don'ts. And then we'll get to your podcast, When Dating Hurts.
Yeah, I'd like to do that. The number one thing I tell people to do is that you can't be an ostrich about this. You can't bury your head in the sand and say, hey, look, that doesn't happen to people like us. That doesn't happen in areas like this. This is not some tough inner city. This isn't, we would pick up on this before this ever got very far. You can say anything you want, comments go here. That probably would have sounded like us back in those days. We'd go, I think my daughter would be a little wiser than that. No. And by the way, I've interviewed a lot of people. One person who is on the podcast is today, unbelievably now, she is a 40-year-old, 41-year-old prosecutor in the same office that prosecuted the case for my daughter. Okay, so my point being, this is someone who went through law school and had problems with somebody in law school who was also going through law school, who then goes on to become a prosecutor in the Philadelphia area. In the meantime, has this abusive relationship going on with a guy who tries to strangle her on a couple of occasions. So it doesn't happen, those pictures that come to mind of people this happens to, you got to throw them away. This really can happen to anybody. So what I'd say to parents and other bystanders, maybe friends, as an example, is this really can happen to anybody. So you have to kind of shake it off and believe that, make that leap if you have to make that leap. And therefore, okay, so what do you do with that? Once you get signed up that this can happen, is looking for things like the warning signs, because one thing that makes it a little bit easier about the warning signs is they fit under one great big umbrella, which is one person exerting power and control over another person. That's the core of it all. And here are some examples. So rather than just give you the umbrella, I want to give you some of the ones that some of these I've held on to since 19 years ago when Kristin was killed. I've heard them way back then, but some of these I've sort of tuned up into today. It's interesting. And I should say this too. Kristin was killed 19 years ago, but I guarantee I've learned more in the last 2 or 3 years than I ever learned in the first 16. So there's a lot there, and we talk about it on the podcast. But anyway, examples. Your partner uses controlling or dominant behavior that eventually permeates your life. And that means permeates every facet of your life. Okay, this person will eventually completely take you over and run you. Your partner exhibits extreme jealousy or possessiveness about who you see and what you do. So, none of this stuff happens in the beginning. You don't see this behavior on the first date or the first time you have coffee. This person could be just delightful, and you might think, wow, I need to tell my friends about this person. And in this case, I'll just use the paradigm of men abusing women, just so it's not confusing. But it can be men abusing women, women abusing men to men, women to women. And then, all communities, just anywhere, women, men, it could be anything. Could be your partner isolates you from your family, friends, and things you like to do. This person, maybe early in the relationship, thinks that you going out, playing a sport you like to play is a waste of time, and all you do is get hot and sweaty. Heck, you could be with me. We could be having fun somewhere. Just start to plant those seeds. Or I don't really like your sister that much. I don't like the way she looks at me. She always seems like she's looking down at me. And then you're thinking, well, maybe I ought to keep her away from him, or maybe we got to spend less time around him, or maybe he doesn't like your friends. Maybe your partner name calls you and puts you down about how you look or what you wear. This is just a way to put you in place. You are subservient to this person. And if you stick around, you're basically enabling more of that type of behavior. Could be your partner constantly checks up on you with texts and phone calls. There are all kinds of ways that people text somebody else to death. Well, where are you now? Where are you now? You said you're going to go to the mall with your friends for an hour or so. It's already 2 hours. What do you mean you're coming out of Macy's? Tell you what, take your phone, take a picture of the Macy's sign and text it back to me. I know of this type of thing happening to people. Maybe your partner makes you feel no one else would ever want you or love you, as if this person is your last best hope. And if you have a relationship that goes on for months and months and maybe years, that person will beat you down to the point where you're thinking, wow, I'm fortunate to have this person because, maybe I am not worth that much. I don't feel like I'm worth that much. Maybe the person says you cannot do anything right, keeps you off balance, maybe even tries to indicate that you're crazy. This is sort of falls into the area of gaslighting. That's a term that's kind of been popular in the last few years, but it's somebody who has a real campaign against you and maybe even sabotages you in different ways. The whole thing about, Brandon, you've mentioned this on your show, about things like you can't find your car keys, and this person makes a big deal out of it, or for all you know, this person moves your car keys from time to time, or your glasses that you wear when you read. But anything like that to just kind of play with your head. And just a few more, someone who lies about practically everything that has ever happened or will happen. In my daughter's case, this guy said he went to Villanova, found out he did a semester there and was actually kicked out of there for plagiarism. But he said he went there and he did go there. Somebody who love bombs you with gifts, fancy dates that he takes you on, and maybe over the top words of love. Love bombing falls into an area of, I feel, a lot of things that you hope would happen at some point in time, but they're all happening to the point where they're happening like bombs dropping. It's like this person is just effusively in love with you, or, hey, let's go eat here. And you're thinking, wow, I've never eaten there. And wow, maybe he has this really great car. The guy that dated my daughter was driving around a really nice white Jeep. She didn't know that it actually belonged to a previous girlfriend who he still kept in touch with. He seemed to have all kinds of things that were found out later on to belong to his brother, who he was partly in business with. But, this somebody telling you that they love you in the first week or two is just not realistic. That person doesn't know you. And maybe in your mind, you're even thinking, wow, I didn't expect to hear it this soon. And your friends are maybe thinking, that's ridiculous. And then a couple more. Someone who speeds up every facet of the relationship and projects your life and your future together. I know of instances of somebody who in the first week or two is referring to you as Mrs., using his last name, Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson, what do you want to do today? Already working on you. We're going to be in this for life. The sort of invisible handcuffs. Having talked with so many people and read a lot about dating abuse and domestic violence, I kept wondering if there was what I'll call a template that every abuser follows. And it goes like this. It's in 5 steps. This does not always happen, but it happens most of the time. And that is, it begins with what I'll call storybook romance. This person makes the scene. Now, you have to understand, people that do these things, a lot of abusers, you're not the first time. You're not the first one to come along. So this is a practiced evil art. But the storybook romance says the right things, appears this in a certain way, has really worked on it, that person has made himself as attractive as possible, seems to really make the scene perfectly. So great things are happening, maybe some gifts or something like that, even from the very beginning. The guy that killed my daughter actually dated someone before that who came to me and said, that she dated him previously, and said that after the first date, she went into work and there were 24 there were 2 bouquets sitting there waiting for her when she walked into work the next morning. And she thought was dating and hanging out with like the most amazing guy. Just makes such a splash. Everybody in the office was talking about it. That's storybook romance. 2 is isolation. We talked about a little bit. Doesn't happen on the first date. The things that will happen on the 20th and 30th date don't happen in the first and second date. That person's still in that romance, that storybook fairy tale stage. But isolation will come usually in all these relationships. You have a cat, doesn't like your cat, spend less time, maybe give your cat away. Doesn't like a lot of things about what you're doing, just wants to kind of have you all to himself. Number 3 is threats of violence. That's somebody who yells at you really sharply and you're thinking, whoa, what did I just do? Better not do that again. Better not mention that again. Better not act that way again. Better not suggest that again. So threats of violence, that is somebody who slaps something near you, just, slams the brakes on in the car when you're in the car with that person, almost hitting your head on the dashboard. Just something that really makes the point that when you are going along with the program, you are rewarded. And when you're not, you will be somehow punished. The next one, number 4, is actual violence, which does not happen in all instances, but happens too much anyway. A little bit of that is too much. But actual violence can fall into slapping you, punching you, shoving you into something, hitting you with something else, pushing you down some steps, and even strangulation. Some people call it choking. Choking's when you have something caught in your throat. Strangulation's when someone is actually strangulating you, cutting off your wind. That's followed by step 5, convincing apology. Somebody who talks about the fact that they were triggered by something earlier in his life. Might have been something his mother used to say to him that used to make him so angry, and you made the mistake of saying the same thing. So you think, well, okay, I'm really sorry that I said that to you, but you really shouldn't hit me. Oh, it'll never happen again. It never happened before. And then the next thing is, that's convincing apology. The next thing is we go back to better behavior. We go back to the storybook romance. And what happens is that you go storybook romance, more isolation, more threats of violence, more violence, different convincing apology, and you just go through it. I know people who've gone through it for months, years, decades. I know a woman who went through it from the time she was in her 20s to her 60s, but people get trapped in these things, and then family comes into play, and finances come into play, and pets come into play. All kinds of reasons people stick around way too long. So yeah, I know that was a blast, but a lot of things to think about.
So those were a bunch of warning signs for people in relationships and for friends and families. And when it comes to friends and families, other things to look for that you might notice are that the person's partner might insult them in front of you, that the person who is being abused might be worrying about making their partner angry. They might be making excuses for their partner. They might have unexplained marks or injuries on them. They might have stopped spending time with friends and family. They might not be themselves anymore. They could be depressed, anxious. There could be a lot of personality changes that are going on. You know, an abuse victim might be going along with everything that their partner says and does. And then also, they might be checking in often with their partner to report where they are, what they're doing. They could be receiving frequent, text messages, phone calls from their partner. They might be talking to you about their partner's temper or jealousy or possessiveness. They could be frequently missing work or school or social outings, social occasions without really much of an explanation or explanations that you don't really believe. And they could be dressing in clothing that is designed to hide bruises, scars. They could be wearing long sleeves in the summer, things that don't make sense, or maybe sunglasses indoors. You might notice that they have limited access to money or credit cards or even the car. They might be given an allowance. You might start noticing things like this. And if you do notice these things, there's certain ways that you should talk to them because every situation is different. But, you should talk to someone in private and let them know that you're concerned. You should point out things that you've noticed that make you a little bit worried about what's going on in the relationship. You should tell the person that you're there for them. And that whenever they feel ready to talk, that you are there, and you should reassure the abuse victim that you'll keep whatever is said between the two of you and let them know that you'll help in any way that you can when they're ready. And a big thing is just to be supportive and to listen and be honest and understand that, the abuse victim might be defensive at first, and it might be hard for them to talk about abuse. And other ways that you can support someone that is going through this to say, like, hey, if you ever need to make a safety plan, if need be, I can help. If your friend decides or family member decides to stay in an abusive relationship, you have to continue to be supportive of them and let them know that they're still your friend, they're still your family, no matter what they choose. And just to encourage them to talk to someone who can help if they can. And we have to remember that abusers are very good at what they do. They're very good at controlling people, manipulating abuse victims. And people who have been emotionally abused or they've been physically abused, they can be depressed, drained, scared. There's shame. They can be confused. And they need help getting out. And yet they've really been trying to be isolated from you. So picking up on these warning signs and just offering support, you can really help them escape. You're noticing these things, you're kind of jarring it in them so things start to really move. And a thing that you should not do, things that you shouldn't do at all, is don't judge or blame them. Don't pressure them. Don't give them advice. And don't place conditions on your support. And also, don't say that the abuser doesn't deserve them. Don't say that the abuser is bad. Because when you try to convey like negative thoughts about the abuser, that may encourage the victim of abuse to defend the abuser, to defend their behavior. And that keeps them kind of closer to the abuser. It's kind of, it's a reaction that they're having because of the manipulation that is going on. So do your best to just kind of focus on the abuse victim and their safety and your support for them. So when it now comes to your podcast, you've been doing this for 3 years now?
Yes, about 3.5. Yes.
3.5 years. And for everyone out there who hasn't listened to your podcast, you should listen to Bill's podcast, because we pretty much have the exact same podcast. It's just I host mine, you host yours, but we talk to survivors and let survivors tell their stories. No bells and whistles on our shows. You know, we're just kind of giving the floor for the most part to the person who is telling their story to help educate and to help validate other people. So for you, when starting that, when you finished the book, like a part of you was missing. So when now talking to people, and you went from book, which is your internal, and you're talking to yourself. And now you're talking to other people. How is that experience for you as far as communicating, not just your story, but helping other people communicate their stories? And I guess, what is the thing you've learned the most by doing this about survivors and about yourself as well?
I learned I can dance back and forth to the different parts you had given me there. One of them is that I found that facing this whole issue, this whole bomb that hit our lives, that facing it head on was the best therapy for me, at least. Not necessarily for my wife and my son, but for me, to face it head on. It really did happen. And what can I do with it? And I learned, I didn't expect this, but I learned that helping others helps us to heal. And I think the survivors on your show and my show have learned that too, that reaching out to other people actually comes back and helps you out, because you feel like you're taking your pain and suffering and turning it into gold for other people. What I've learned is that survivors are heroic people who've overcome what seemed like insurmountable odds stacked against them. They felt so trapped. They felt like they had nobody they could turn to. They felt like they had people who maybe wouldn't believe them, people who would be disappointed in them. They felt embarrassed. They felt awful. And so they maybe reached the point where they're just buying into the fact that this is my life now. And they find out that, no, it doesn't have to be. So I think that being now the conduit of information, I'm not the generator of information, but I'm the conduit, that people come to me. They write me at billmitchell@whendatinghurts.com. They come to me and they talk about what they want to do. They usually say, sorry about your daughter, and I appreciate your show, but then they say a little bit about what they're going through, and maybe they want to come on the show. So that's very good. And I think that it's felt great to be part of that conduit that I didn't really realize in the beginning how much good it could do. And even now I'm still catching up to the fact that it's done so much good around the world. When you do this, you're sitting in your house that you've been in all these years, in your office, you can't imagine this projecting all the way around the world. The fact of the matter is also learning that survivors love to hear other survivors speak. They come away saying, wow, it really wasn't just me, or, oh my God, that sounds like my story, or I thought I was alone. And as it turns out, I feel like the best coaches for victims are today's survivors. There's so much trust there, of course. It's just like this sisterhood, brotherhood in some cases. So for someone to break free, they have to work it out for themselves. That's something else that we've learned over the course of time. Everybody in your family, all of your friends can wish that you break free from this relationship. But much like with drug addiction or alcoholism, until you get to the point where you're 100% committed to your freedom versus this other person, until you're 100% committed, you really won't shake it. You'll find yourself drifting back. And Brandon, you've talked about the fact that the average is supposed to be 7 times someone leaves their abuser before they finally leave for the last time. So we can see how sticky it is to get out. But yeah, I've learned a lot. I'm I'm in the participation business, but I'm also an observer of what's happened over the course of time for us and for others.
I guess as far as how your family feels about you doing the show, you all had probably different roads of healing. So can you expand on like that and like how everyone did anyone say like I don't like what you're doing or like that's too much for me or things like that? Because you, as you said, you went head on talking with people. So what was their experience and your experience with this?
Well, I've been one ever since the speeches in the very beginning where I wanted to take what I had inside and let it out for one reason or another. I know I'm sure it's more complicated than even I realized, but I did learn fairly quickly that there was power in that. So it's been an evolution that way. You can see how going from speeches where there are a group of people in the room, could be a couple hundred people, to writing a book where anybody can get access to the story, and then finally the podcast where it goes around the world and just you have no idea what's going to happen. I didn't know if I would only have 1,000 downloads and then it would die. So it's been very eye-opening. The acceptance has been absolutely wonderful. In terms of family members, there are 3 of us initially in this family when this took place. My son decided, and you can read this in the book, my son decided really on the first full day afterwards that he didn't want to get swallowed up in what happened, that he was a 17-year-old kid, and that he wasn't going to let this ruin his life. He didn't want to walk around being the brother of a girl who was murdered. He wanted to walk around being himself and have his own life, and then go off to college and make his own career. And he successfully did all of that, but he did it consciously. It was a pretty grown-up moment for a 17-year-old. My wife has been more, she's you may find this hard to believe with all the things I'm doing, but she's a very private person, and I guess I'm not. And so I have had to slowly but surely gain permission over the course of time at every step. She wanted to read the book more than once before we let the book get out. And I think that what's happened with her mostly is she's seen all the good that these acts have done, and so therefore supports it. And oftentimes says to me, I hear this at least once a week, I could never do what you're doing. She just couldn't. She'd like to work for a domestic violence agency in some way, but it's just too close to what happened to her baby, our daughter. So we're all very different. We support each other in different ways.
So thank you for sharing there about your family. So when it comes to you, I really just wanted you on the show today because, people come to our show, they've listened to survivor stories, but they've exhausted a lot of people. They've listened to all of our episodes, and we've done a lot of episodes. And when I found your show, I was like, this is exactly like our show. And you go about everything, pretty much the same way. And I wanted people to have other places to hear stories if they've gone through all of our stories, and that, going forward, that I might do a feed drop of one of your episodes in our line, and you might do the same thing with our show on yours, so people will be able to hear it, but they can also go and hear your show and the people that you've had on as well, because I just think it's important that, for the people out there that have gone through all the stuff on ours, that they have other places to go, and that we have other friends of the show that are really trying to help facilitate stories and help people learn through story. And, doing that to me is different than the clinical type of shows, and people learn differently, or they take things in differently. And when you hear it through another survivor's voice, it just hits different.
Yes, it does. Yeah, you can go through the warning signs all day long, and we could sit here and rattle off statistics. I'll do the only one that I use, which is 1 in 3 women. Here it comes. This will be the millionth time I've said this. 1 in 3 women will suffer serious physical violence at the hands of an intimate partner at some point in their lifetime. It typically happens between the ages of 16 and 24, but can happen to any woman at any age. How many times? Now, that's a big number, 1 in 3. But that statistic is impressive, but it's not very human in a way. It's not as human as, like you say, a story. You get into someone's story, you're listening to somebody speaking, and you think, wow, what a wonderful person. This person was so patient with what was going on. And then you hear the next part, how they were taken advantage of or how they were compromised in some way. It's so strong, and those will stick with you all day long. The 1 in 3 might stay with you for a bit, but I think the stories stay with you. I've heard so many on my show and your show, and they stick around. I mean, some of them are jaw-dropping, and you just think, I can't imagine how that person survived, and I can't imagine how they are functioning today. They're so heroic, so precious, these people. So, and then you think about there's a new crop of people coming up every year who need to hear this. You never really will be finished. It's saddening, but once you get past the tears, you have to take action, do something, learn something, tell somebody something,
And before we end off our show today, do you have anything else you want to tell everyone that I haven't asked you today?
Oh, my. That part I hadn't thought too much about.
You gave me that question on your show, so I'm doing it right back to you.
Yeah, but you had a great answer on the other hand. But I just encourage people to wake up and really believe that this can happen to just about anybody. And I've had instances, once we let the world know years ago, this happened with Kristin. I had a cousin come to me who is now on my show, telling her story of her marital abuse. I've had daughters of a couple of my cousins come to me who want to be on my show but can't yet because they're still dealing with court proceedings and divorces and things, but they'll be on at some point. People kind of come out of the woodwork when they know that this has happened to you. They gravitate to others who've been through it or are still going through it. So, yeah, take it seriously, learn about it. Don't let it just pass through and you don't really take action. You really owe it to yourself to know things so you can pass them on to people you care about. Please do that.
Well, Bill, thank you very much for being our guest today and being a friend of our show. And I really just can't thank you enough for being here, sharing and not just your story, but everything that you're doing, because you're helping so many people. And I can't thank you enough, and our community can't thank you enough. So a big, big thank you.
Oh, that's really great. Thank you. And look, thanks for being a guiding light in all this. It's you put the bar up pretty high, so let's see if I can jump up and touch it once in a while, maybe get over it. I don't know.
Well, thank you, Bill, once again for being our guest today. And if you want to be a guest on our Survivor Story episodes, please do go to our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, there's a button that says Guest Form. When you click on that button, it takes you to our Guest Form page. And there you can read all of our instructions and either send us an email at narcissistapocalypse@gmail.com or fill out our Guest Form and press the Submit button. And please do send it in the format that we ask for. And we have a support group at our website at narcissistapocalypse.com. So if you need support, go to narcissistapocalypse.com. Top of the page, there's a button that says support group. When you click on that button, it takes you to our support group page. There, you can see that we have Zoom meetings every Wednesday night, Thursday afternoons, and Saturday nights. We have forum boards for you to post on to get the validation that you need from survivors just like you. It is a wonderful group of people on there. So if you need support, join our support group today. And that is it for today's episode. I hope you found it helpful. And for myself and Bill Mitchell, we hope you have a good night.